The movie opens with a judgment carried out by a mafia boss named Augustino. That day, Augustino managed to catch one of his men stealing illegal goods. As punishment for what he had done, Augustino immediately killed him.
Are you going to kill me?
How you like that? Oh, I can.
After that, the story shifts to two robbers whose identities are still unknown. The two of them sneak into a cartel warehouse to steal all the money from their business.
You're making a big mistake.
After successfully getting away with the money, they leave it with a young man named Wilson. 1 week later, Wilson has just been kicked out of a casino after losing at gambling over and over again. After leaving the casino, Wilson returns to his apartment and finds the two robbers who had left the money with him already waiting there. One of them, named Desmond, immediately accuses Wilson of spending the money on gambling. Hearing the accusation, Wilson quickly denies it. Wilson says that he only used a small amount of money, while the rest was still hidden above the ceiling. However, when Wilson checks the hiding place, all the money is gone. No one knows who took it, but because of that, Wilson is immediately beaten up and killed.
It's a kid like you gonna get that type of cash.
Wilson's death creates two problems at once. The first is a murder case that forces the police to step in and investigate. The second is that Wilson turns out to be Augustino's trusted courier, so his death fills a mafia boss with a desire for revenge. Meanwhile, a detective named Muntz visits Wilson's father, Steve, to take him to the hospital. Muntz tells him that Wilson was found dead and that the case is currently under police investigation. For your information, Steve used to be a police officer who worked in the intelligence division. However, Steve decided to retire early for personal reasons. Wilson's body is later buried by Steve at a location not far from where they live. Not long after the funeral, a woman named Charlotte arrives to offer her condolences. Charlotte says that she had been dating Wilson for a year. She also explains that their relationship began because Wilson often came to the casino where she worked. Even though he tries to accept what happened and stay patient, Steve is still consumed by thoughts of revenge. The horrific way his son died, combined with the fact that the police still haven't found the killer, eventually pushes Steve to take matters into his own hands. Using the intelligence skills he once had, Steve decides to go into the city to find his son's killer. The story then shifts to Augustino, who is meeting his business partner and fellow mafia boss, Svetlana. They have been working together for a long time. Svetlana is responsible for producing the illegal goods, while Augustino is in charge of selling them. That day, Svetlana tells him that the price of the magic powder has gone up significantly. According to Svetlana, the price increase happened because the cost of imported raw materials had also gone up, so they had no choice but to raise the price. After hearing her explanation, Augustino tries to negotiate the price that Svetlana set, but because his offer is too low, Svetlana decides to leave. At the same time, Steve arrives at the apartment where Wilson used to live and plans to stay there for the night. Steve sees that the crime scene is still a mess. Looking at the condition of the place, Steve feels that the police should have been able to find the culprit more easily. But strangely, even after a week has passed, the investigation still hasn't produced any results. While inside the apartment, Steve sees a photo of Wilson with his mother, reminding him of the past, specifically the day Wilson said goodbye before leaving for the city. Back then, Steve actually tried to stop Wilson from leaving, but Wilson insisted because he wanted to go to the city to become rich. While remembering those days, Steve finds Wilson's phone, which had been left behind in the apartment. Steve turns it back on and checks the recent calls and latest messages. He finds out that the last person to send a message was Desmond, whose contact name was saved as the big boss's son. Curious, Steve tries to call Desmond, but as soon as the call is answered, Steve quickly hangs up.
Who is this? Let's try this again.
The incident makes Steve even more suspicious of someone named Desmond. To find out who Desmond really is and where he is now, Steve goes to the casino where Charlotte works. There, Steve learns that Desmond is the son of a mafia boss who is known for being a womanizer. Charlotte also tells him that not long ago, Wilson reportedly lost a huge amount of money gambling. That raises a question of where Wilson got that much money when he only worked as a day laborer.
He got in pretty deep playing cards.
You want money from that, dude?
He wouldn't tell me.
Before they part ways, Charlotte tells Steve that Desmond usually spends every night at a bar owned by his father on the outskirts of the city. Steve then goes to Desmond's father's bar and manages to get inside by using the police badge he still keeps. There, Steve finally meets Desmond in person and asks to speak with him privately. Using his experience and intelligence skills, Steve uses a simple trick to find out whether Desmond was really involved in his son's murder some time ago. Out of all the questions Steve asks, Desmond's answers don't make much sense. The most suspicious part is when Desmond claims that he doesn't know Wilson at all. Yet not long after that, Desmond threatens to shoot Steve if he doesn't leave the place immediately.
Kind of a big deal. Mr. Popularity, huh?
The next morning, Steve meets with Muntz to ask for his help with a few things. First, Steve hands over Desmond's pistol, which he had taken by force the night before. Steve asks Muntz to run a ballistic test and compare whether the bullet that killed Wilson is the same type as the one used in Desmond's pistol. Hearing the request, Muntz simply says that he'll do it and give the results to Steve later. Before they part ways, Muntz asks where Steve is staying so it will be easier to deliver the ballistic test results. Without suspecting anything, Steve tells him that he's currently staying at the apartment where his late son was found dead.
What is this? It's a gun.
After that, Steve immediately meets with a gangster he had previously paid to keep track of Charlotte's every move. The gangster then tells Steve that Charlotte has been secretly keeping a large amount of money, although the gangster himself doesn't know where it came from. 3 days later, Detective Muntz does something disgraceful. He secretly meets with Desmond to take advantage of the situation. Muntz demands 2 separate payments in exchange for helping Desmond deal with the problems he's facing. First, Muntz asks for money in return for falsifying the ballistic test results and claiming that the bullet that killed Wilson is exactly the same type as the one fired from Desmond's pistol. Second, Muntz tells Desmond that he needs to kill Steve before Steve comes after him. According to Muntz, Steve is known as a ruthless former police officer with an extensive record of dealing with criminals. Because of that, Muntz also gives Desmond the address where Steve is currently staying so Desmond can send his men to kill Steve as soon as possible.
Might need to know ways.
After finishing extorting Desmond, Muntz calls his father, who turns out to be Augustino. Muntz tells him that Desmond has gotten himself into serious trouble with a former police officer named Steve. The moment he hears Steve's name, Augustino falls silent as if he can't believe it. No one knows what happened between the two of them in the past, but the look on Augustino's face shows that he can already imagine what might happen to his son over the next few days.
He killed the son of a cop.
You sure about that?
The kid is in a lot of trouble.
Based on the information from Muntz, Augustino calls Desmond to talk about the situation. Augustino asks Desmond why he killed Wilson and why the problem had to be solved by taking his life. Hearing the question, Desmond explains that he was jealous because his father always cared more about Wilson than about him, even though he was Augustino's own son. Even though the reason sounds unreasonable, Desmond still tells his father not to worry because he promises to kill Steve soon. Hearing that, Augustino immediately tells Desmond not to do it, but because Desmond is stubborn, he chooses to leave anyway. Meanwhile, Steve goes to see Charlotte to ask her directly about the information he had previously received from the gangster leader. When Steve brings it up, Charlotte suddenly bursts into tears and regrets everything that has happened. Charlotte explains that Wilson once told her he had just received a large payment from working as a drug courier. That's where all the trouble began. Day by day, Charlotte watched Wilson spend more and more time at the casino, wasting all the money he had. Not wanting the money to disappear just like that, Charlotte secretly took it, planning to start a new life with Wilson. In her opinion, it was better for her to manage the money than let Wilson lose it all at the gambling table. But it turned out that Wilson had lied about where the money came from. The money he brought actually belonged to Desmond, the son of a Mafia boss. After hearing the whole story, Steve simply tells Charlotte to leave as soon as possible before Desmond finds out the truth.
I just wanted to get out of here. I just wanted to leave this place. Leave me. I did love him.
You loved him. You have to live with it.
That night, Desmond follows Detective Muntz's advice and goes to kill Steve. But when he arrives, things don't go according to plan. Steve has already anticipated the attack. Instead of killing Steve, Desmond ends up watching Steve set his car and his men's vehicles on fire. The next morning, Muntz comes to see Steve and hands him the ballistic test results. Of course, the results have already been manipulated and show that the bullet that killed Wilson is different from the one fired from Desmond's pistol. Since there is no evidence pointing to Desmond, Steve says that he will stop his search there and return to his village.
You're not going anywhere, are you?
Is there?
Right.
After parting ways with Steve, Muntz secretly passes the information on to Desmond so he can attack Steve again with several of his men. After arriving at the village, Desmond is unable to find Steve. Instead, he meets Swilly, Steve's adoptive father. Desmond then asks where Steve is. Swilly replies that Steve hasn't come home for a long time. Hearing that answer, Desmond looks confused until finally...
Oh, shit.
Seeing Steve get shot makes Desmond feel satisfied, and he immediately leaves the scene. Desmond assumes his target is dead without checking his condition himself. That decision turns out to be a huge mistake for the Mafia boss's son. It turns out that Steve was only grazed by a bullet and is successfully taken to the hospital. At the hospital, Steve is looked after by a prosecutor named Olivia, an old acquaintance from when he was still a police officer. Not long afterward, Detective Muntz also arrives and pretends to be saddened by what happened to Steve. Muntz then asks whether Swilly was at the shooting scene. Swilly replies that he only heard the gunshots and afterward found Steve lie in the backyard.
Well, I heard he was injured. I figured I'd come by and ask him if you...
I heard a shotgun blast.
You have any idea who might have wanted to do this?
Yeah.
The news that Steve is still alive leaves Desmond completely confused. Muntz explains that this is exactly why Steve is so respected within the police force and feared in the criminal world. According to Muntz, there's no other choice but to ask Augustino for help. Having no other option, Desmond goes to see his father. As soon as they meet, Desmond gets yelled at nonstop. Augustino is furious because Desmond is still trying to kill Steve, even though he had already forbidden him from doing so. Hearing his father's anger, Desmond immediately loses his temper and makes a completely unexpected decision.
That boy. You're going to have to go on the road now.
Not for you.
Desmond orders his men to meet with Svetlana and offer her a new partnership. Secretly, Desmond plans to take over his father's Mafia empire and kill Augustino when the time is right. Not stopping there, Desmond also tells his men to contact Muntz and asks him to kill Steve. Not long afterward, Desmond's men meet with Svetlana and tell her they are willing to buy her products at a much higher price. However, there's one condition. Svetlana must end her partnership with Augustino within 1 week. Hearing the offer, Svetlana immediately agrees and promises to meet Desmond's condition. After taking care of that, Desmond's men quickly contact Muntz and deliver Desmond's message. As an upfront payment, Muntz receives a deposit of $100,000. Muntz is also promised an even bigger payment if he successfully kills Steve.
Finn Adair and Desmond Packard.
Scratch it?
You rub it out.
Like another?
At the same time, Desmond returns to the village to vent his anger. Desmond wants Steve to suffer the same way he did. Without thinking twice, Desmond goes straight to Swilly with the intention of killing him.
You want something, boy?
Two old hillbillies would be so hard to snuff.
Oh, no. You just gave me a reason.
Meanwhile, Steve finally wakes up from his coma, and his condition gradually begins to improve. Steve is quite surprised to see Olivia watching over him. Steve immediately asks, "Where's Swilly now?" But before Olivia can answer, she suddenly receives news that the police have just found Swilly's body after he was shot to death. Hearing the news, Steve immediately gets out of bed and decides to take revenge. His son has been murdered, and now his adoptive father has suffered the same fate. That makes Steve feel like he no longer has any hope of living the way he once did. Now, his only goal is to kill Desmond and destroy Augustino's Mafia organization. The next day, while Steve is at Olivia's house, he suddenly gets a call from Muntz asking to meet. Munn says that the police have just obtained investigation results that provide an important lead in Wilson's death. They eventually meet and immediately get into a heated argument. Steve reveals that the day before, after leaving the hospital, he was stopped by two criminals carrying police badges. From that incident, Steve is convinced that the two men were sent by Muntz to kill him. Realizing that everything he had done had been exposed, Muntz immediately attacks Steve until finally, after killing Muntz, Steve takes his phone and sends a message to Desmond. Steve pretends to be Muntz and tells Desmond that Steve has been successfully killed. After that, Steve asks Desmond to come to a warehouse to complete the final deal. Desmond then goes to the warehouse with one of his men. Neither of them has any idea what is about to happen there until finally, Meanwhile, Augustino receives a video from Svetlana showing Desmond's plan to overthrow him as the head of the Mafia from the beginning. Svetlana has no interest in working with Desmond and chooses to remain Augustino's partner. As soon as he learns that there's a traitor within his own organization, Augustino personally steps in and kills all of Desmond's men.
Yo, boss, you been running around better?
As the night gets later, Steve goes to Augustino's house to tell him that he has already killed Desmond. According to Steve, it was a punishment Desmond deserved because he had murdered his son by shooting him in the head. Then the question comes up, how did Steve know that Desmond was Augustino's son? And how did Steve know where the Mafia boss lived? It turns out that Steve used to be a corrupt cop who worked for Augustino. They used to work together frequently to expand Augustino's illegal business. But everything changed after Steve's wife died of leukemia. At that time, Steve decided to put an end to all of his dirty work and retire early from the police force. What disappointed Steve the most was that Augustino still recruited Wilson as a drug courier, even though Augustino already knew that Wilson was Steve's son. Even though Augustino had once given Wilson special treatment, Steve still couldn't accept what had happened. His hope of living a peaceful life was destroyed because of Augustino's decisions. Since they are both consumed by anger and both of their sons are dead, Steve and Augustino eventually get into a fistfight. Even though Steve is hit by several bullets in vital parts of his body and doesn't have much longer to live, he has secretly already handed over all the evidence of Augustino's crimes to 911. Now, Augustino can only wait for the authorities to arrive and arrest him. The story then shifts to Charlotte, who is shocked to hear that Steve has died while Augustino has been arrested. After hearing the news, Charlotte immediately remembers Steve's warning to leave and run away. Charlotte quickly gets out of bed, intending to follow his advice right away. But not long afterward, someone suddenly shows up and kills Charlotte. It turns out to be Svetlana, who arrives just in time to take back the money that had previously been stolen from her. It is later revealed that the cartel warehouse robbed by Desmond at the beginning of the movie actually belonged to Svetlana. That's why Svetlana was never interested in accepting Desmond's offer to betray his own father. It is never explained how Svetlana managed to track down the money. What is certain is that Svetlana eventually recovers all of it and becomes the only Mafia leader still standing in the city. The movie ends.